I'll turn 68 in a couple of weeks. So he's my age. What else do we know? Besides, he's elderly and he had 10 rifles. 10 rifles? June Christmas. How in the world do you smuggle 10 rifles up to a 32nd floor hotel room? Along with all the ammunition. He's been there since Thursday.
He's been there, didn't he go there several times before?
I don't know.
That's what they were saying to me.
Okay. I just found out about him about 15 minutes ago.
Oh yeah, he stayed in that hotel like several times before
Right. Okay.
last night.
So he's well known there, or he's...
Well, he's a resident of Las Vegas. So.
Oh, okay. Huh. I'm sure he had a reason, everybody has a reason to do things. I guess I've already turned this thing on and talking about the shooting. Anyway, okay, so we're going to talk about preparing for a client and ending a session. Actually, they're both very similar. And it seems odd that when you're preparing for a client, you need to think about how you're going to end the session, but you always need to anticipate what's going to happen. Look, you've got a really nice chair.
Fancy.
I stole that from outside. Don't tell anybody.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I got it just for you. Actually, I got it just for Johnny, I think. It was Johnny that needed a chair. Anyway. Okay, so we're going to talk about preparing for a client and ending a session. All of these things are very logical. There's no magic to putting things together or ending a session. You just have to think about it before it happens. So the more you think about it, the more likely you're not going to be struggling, wandering around going, I don't know what to do next. One of those kind of deals. The thing that you need to do, you need to be prepared. I have an interview today with an individual for the social work position, which is kind of exciting. And of course, over the weekend, I had to prepare because HR hadn't given us any information. It was kind of odd. All we had was her application. So I had to put a bunch of things together this weekend. Actually, I did it yesterday afternoon. Yeah, I should have done it on Saturday. You're right, I should have done it on Saturday. Saturday, I was watching a football game. And then I was worrying about how badly my team played. So they won anyway. It's not a good. Practitioner must get ready to meet the client, of course. They must gather referral information. And of course, that's what we did. We have our application, so we have our referral information. We needed to collect forms and any other supplies that we need, of course. We need to accumulate those, anticipating what is going to be needed by that select client. Purpose of an agenda for the meeting is clarified. You do need to have an agenda for the meeting. And of course, when we interview clients, actually we're going to interview the client here. It's really kind of, not the client, what am I talking about? This is an applicant for a position. But we're going to actually interview her here, which is something that never happens for a couple different reasons. I don't want to say that your institution's cheap, but they never bring people in. Yeah, my institution as well. She just happens to be in the area. You believe that, right? Yeah. She just happens to be in the area because what's happening is that she's interviewing with another institution. Yeah, that's right. She's over in Farmington. I wonder where she could be interviewing. Same place I interviewed before I came here. San Juan. Okay. So you need to create an agenda for the meeting. And you need to clarify it so that you understand what you're going to be saying, what they're going to be saying to you. Sorry, I'm late. I didn't want it. I didn't want to come. Yeah. Okay. I know that's not true. You have such a good time in my house.
It kind of has some humor.
There we go. Okay. The practitioner must consider the client's needs in the physical arrangement of the building. Really, the building? You have to think about the building? Yeah, you do. If the individual is in a wheelchair, of course, you need to make sure that the building is accessible to that select individual. I don't know about the person coming in. I have no idea. She may be in a wheelchair, she may not be in a wheelchair. Probably not. I mean, most people aren't, are they? In wheelchairs, I hope. What it's going to look like if we have her weight. And one of the things I was talking to Irene downstairs about was that I wanted to put her in my office rather, if she gets here early, before I'm done with all my classes, that we'll put her in my office rather than put her in the conference area. The conference area's got boxes stacked around. That's where we got the water cooler there, but we also have the microwave oven is there. I don't know. It just looks like it's not a very nice place to wait. Anyway, so she's going to wait in my office, which is just a little bit better than that. I don't have boxes stacked around. I have stuff all over the walls.
Give her something to look at.
That's the waiting area. And the meeting room, of course. We are going to meet in the conference room. So that's what our plan is. If the client has any physical limitations, then the practitioner must make appropriate alterations. We've got to think about these things. And that's one of the reasons why I have showed you the picture of the man in the wheelchair. She didn't tell me about anything, so I think I'm okay. The client's culture should be considered to ensure that all the appropriate steps are taken to make the session as beneficial as possible. If the practitioner does not have a working knowledge of the client's culture, then it is appropriate to research the culture with the understanding that such writing is often stereotyped and inaccurate. And of course, Curtis and I talk about Tony Hillerman all the time. Actually, we don't. He just glares every time I mention Hillerman's name. But the reality is, it's if you don't have any other information about this reservation, it's a good place to start. So where would you find good information about the reservation? Since obviously I don't have a clue. Curtis, where the hell would you find that information? Is there any place to get any good information about this reservation? This lady's coming in from Fort Wayne, Indiana. My brother used to live in Fort Wayne. She's from Marion, which is just north of my hometown.
I guess it depends if they're driving or if they're flying in. If they're driving in, then basically once they enter the reserve, there's usually places like travel centers or visitor centers and stuff like that.
Are there visitor centers on the reservation?
There's one in Chinling. Yeah, there's one in
And
Chinling.
then there's one as you're coming in from Landing.
I don't think she's going to be coming in from Blanding. Thank you very much. She's going to be coming in from Albuquerque.
Oh, okay.
And she's going to be going through Farmington. Maybe there's one in Shiprock, I don't know.
There's a couple of them.
Okay.
I think they have one in Farmington, isn't it? That visitor center across from Kmart.
Yep.
I've only been to Farmington once, so I don't know where Kmart is, but that's not important. Actually, I've been there twice. I drove through it once and we went there for some kind of a retreat or something. Okay, well, we're looking for her culture, and her culture is my culture, so that ought to be interesting. I already know about her culture. She's from Marion. They're the Giants, the Marion Giants. She went to Ball State, which is that's in Muncie, and I'm from Muncie. What the hell's going on here? I don't know why in the world would this lady apply to come here? Not only here at Dene College, but also someplace in Farmington. I wonder what that college could possibly be. Isn't there only one?
I think they have Highland.
Oh, Highland is there? Okay.
Highland
Oh,
University.
maybe that's the other place. Possibly that's the other place.
Do you mind if we have a guest?
No, not at all. Okay, so we need to find out about their culture. Like I said, I already know about her culture, so I don't have to worry about that. I think I know about her culture, but then again, I haven't been home since she was born. So maybe everything's changed in my home state. I don't know. Of course, I know. I go visit my. I used to go.
So she's applying for a position here or what?
Yeah,
Oh.
social work. So we'll see what happens. No, we won't. Practitioner needs to understand how the client may feel about the first meeting. They probably feel, if not embarrassed, then they certainly feel hesitant about coming in. Nobody thinks they're crazy enough to have to go see a practitioner. And certainly uncomfortable. Everybody feels uncomfortable when they're talking to a new person or meeting a new person. Of course, I'm meeting this person from my hometown, and I have no idea what she's like. She's probably taller than I am. Practically everybody is. Damn it! Did I put that on the film? Yeah, I did.
That's on video?
I know. So she might be short. It's a possibility. Maybe she's not unless she's from a relative or something. I don't think she's a relative. Anyway, okay. So we all feel embarrassed, we all feel hesitant to some extent, and uncomfortable. So we have to understand who this person is. I would be a little hesitant if the individual that I was counseling didn't feel uncomfortable. They need to feel uncomfortable to some extent. If they are comfortable in coming in to talk to you, then that means that they're used to it. And if they're used to it, they probably haven't gotten anything out of anything that has happened to them before. So they should feel uncomfortable. Everybody should feel uncomfortable. You should feel uncomfortable about meeting somebody that you've never met before. I feel uncomfortable about meeting this lady this afternoon. And there's all kinds of stuff just erupting right now, just right now. It's really kind of strange dealing with this position. So I have no idea what's going to happen next. Practitioner must put away all distracting thoughts so that they can concentrate on the needs of the client. Focus. Myopic. You need to be myopic about your client, but taking in all the information that you're getting. We've already talked about reading their body language, reading their face, trying to determine how they're feeling from the way that they look. And this is really important. We need to take in as much information as we possibly can. We need to determine if this individual is giving us all the information that they have. We need to help them as the best we possibly can. And the only way that we can do that is to understand what their real problem is. They're going to try to hide it. They're going to try to distract you. They're going to try to wave their hand over here while they're doing something with the other hand. They're going to try to do that. Remember my story about the young lady that kept flipping her hair and leaning over, showing me her cleavage. She was trying to distract me because she had a real serious problem. I didn't realize it was that serious at the time, but she was trying to do what she had always done with men, which was control them. And I was certainly a male. It all worked out in the end, but it was tough. It was a real tough first session. Her in a sundress, practically throwing herself, literally throwing herself at me, throwing her hair onto my lap, her long hair onto my lap. Who does that? Somebody that's trying to distract you. So you have to be aware that this individual may potentially try to distract you. Beginning the first meeting appropriately is essential to the client-practitioner relationship. First impressions have lasting effects on future interactions. Okay, you don't have to be dynamic, but you do have to make contact with the select individual. First impressions are extremely important. So the greeting is essential to connecting with that select individual. Hello, my name is. If you are a doctor, you don't have to mention that you're a doctor. They potentially have your expertise, but maybe not. It's possible that they don't. So the first thing that you need to do is greet them and tell them who you are. Not bragging about your expertise, but at the same time you need to explain to them that you are a licensed practitioner of one kind or another, and that you're going to be the one that is counseling them. Hello, my name is Bruce. I'm a licensed clinical practitioner. I have a PhD in psychology, and we're going to see if we can help you today. Something like that. Okay. Yeah, so I would use my first name. I use my first name with you guys all the time, despite the fact that I have a PhD. I don't want you to call me doctor. It's so off-putting, isn't it? Doctor. Ugh. So I worked in medicine for 30 years, and in medicine, that's how doctors keep everybody at arm's length, is by making everybody call them doctor. You know, I'm not Charlie, I'm Dr. Johnson, you know, that kind of thing. They make the nurses call them doctor. They make all their subordinates. Everybody's their subordinate. So it forces people at arm's length, and I don't think that's right. We need to be friends, because that's the only way to interact. Ground rules need to be clarified. What's the purpose of the meeting? How long is the meeting going to be? Normally you have a scheduled time, and you can talk about the scheduled time. This meeting is a 45-minute session. If we need to go over a little bit, that's okay. But we can't go over too much because I have another client coming in at a select time. Any special considerations that need to be addressed. One of them shouldn't be control your language, and we talked about that before. If they need to talk in a certain patois, if they need to swear during the session, if you don't allow them to do that, then potentially you're not going to get the full impact of what their problem is. Okay. Those of you who are offended by swearing, I apologize, but I've been in this situation before. And if you don't let the individual talk the way that they need to talk, then you're not going to get the information. And I've seen that over and over and over again. The military, enlisted personnel usually are not supposed to swear at officers, and a lot of times they have a hard time relaying to the officer just exactly how serious the situation is, because they're not allowed to use whatever language they're used to. And because of that, a lot of times, the officer's getting misinformation. But whose fault is it? It's the officer's fault for not letting the individual communicate the way they're used to. When greeting the client, be aware of the loudness of your voice, the fact that you're either making eye contact or not making eye contact, and how you address them. The first thing that you should do is probably address them as Mr. or Mrs. Ms. if you don't know if they're married or not. And that way that you show them respect. You don't use a diminutive with them. If their name is Charles, you don't call them Charlie or Chuck. You don't do that. You probably need to use their last name. And then they will, of course, you're telling them to use your first name, so then potentially, they will tell you, go ahead and call me Charlie. Or you can ask that question. How would you like me to address you? And at that point, they'll tell you what they want you to call them. This may be another one of those distracting things. They may say, "Oh, call me, King Charles or whatever." I don't know. Yeah, right. Okay, sure, fine. That's okay. Okay, King Charles, how are we doing today? What's going on today? I understand that you're living in a box down by Kmart, across from Kmart. Issues of privacy and confidentiality are important in how you first meet your client. If you must identify a person in a waiting room and cannot guess who your client might be, you can say very quietly, "I am Jesse Melendez. Are you Ms. Chin?" If a receptionist is able to identify your client, you can just identify yourself to your client. If it's a waiting room and there are a bunch of people out there, then of course you don't want to go screaming out her name. When I worked in medicine, of course, that's the only way we had to identify people. But in this case, it's a little bit more delicate, so you certainly shouldn't do that. Be aware that many clients experience some shame in seeking help, so confidentiality is very important. Of course, you don't want everybody to know that Ms. Chin is coming in to see a counselor. The practitioner should invite the client to introduce themselves. The practitioner should determine how the client wants to be addressed, of course. Some people don't like to have first names used. Where I come from, this should be interesting. I'm going to talk to the lady from my hometown, west now. 30 miles north of where I'm from. It should be interesting because where I come from, if you call somebody by their last name, just their last name, Bedoni, that means I want to punch you in the face, or I'm threatening you and you should punch me in the face. That's what I'm saying, okay? Right. In some places, they just use last names. They call people by their last names. But where I come from, if you do that, then you're asking for a fight. You usually talk to people using their first name and their formal first name. So if their name is Charles, you call them Charles. You don't call them Charlie or Chuck or Chad or whatever. Or Chick. I had an uncle that we called Chick. His name was Chester. I guess Chick is the diminutive for Chester, so we called him Chick. That's an old turn of the 20th century nickname, Chick, that of course now people think of as, that's a name that you use for female personnel, I guess. Back in the 60s, chicks and birds, they were. Okay. Using a last name in any circumstance shows respect. So if you call them Mr. This or Ms. or Mrs., probably the best idea is by referring to them by their title and also by their last name. You can never go wrong calling somebody Mr. This or Mrs. That. Usually it works. Every once in a while you'll run into something. I was working in a rural health clinic in Oklahoma, and we had a lady in town, and her name was, that was her name, R-O-A-R-K-E. It's a good Irish name. It's a good Irish name. Oh yeah. And in Ireland, of course, they pronounce it Rourke. So that's what I said, not knowing, of course, who the hell she was. So I said, Charlene Rourke, you're up next. And she just jumped on me with both feet. It turns out that that's the Irish pronunciation. Well, there's an English pronunciation. As it turns out, there's an English pronunciation, even though it's an Irish name. And the English, of course, the English hate the Irish, and the Irish hate the English. That's the way it works. And evidently, she's from the Old South, and so where she comes from, it wasn't pronounced Rourke, it was pronounced Roark. Roark. That's the English pronunciation of the name Rourke. So I got my ass chewed for about 5 minutes about how to mispronounce a name, and the fact that I was an idiot. And I was not, had never been in proper society, obviously, if I didn't know how to pronounce a simple name like Roar. Of course, I had to take her blood pressure, and her blood pressure was way, way up. I can tell you, she was pissed. That lady was pissed. And of course, I told everybody, why didn't you warn me about Mrs. Roar coming in? And they said, well, we thought everybody knew that you pronounced that name Roar. Hell no, man. Haven't you ever watched the movies? That name's pronounced Rourke. There's a famous cowboy movie that takes place up in Monument Valley. It was filmed up in Monument Valley with John Wayne, and one of the lead characters is named Rourke. Actually, half the people in the movie are named Rourke, as it turns out. Shirley Tipple's in that movie, and she marries the guy named Rourke. I know. Wow, I know. Very, very odd. People tend to feel more comfortable with professionals who fully explain their process, what they're going to do, what will be expected of each person participating. Of course, she's the one, or they are the one participating, and the purpose of the meeting. And of course, we need to talk about the limits of confidentiality. Confidentiality is not absolute. Confidentiality is almost always absolute. You rarely have to worry about it. But there are limits to confidentiality. And of course, that's one of the things you have to talk about. And it's something that you need to talk about in the first meeting. If she talks about a criminal act that she has committed, you have to tell the police. You don't have a choice. And this, she needs to, or they need to know that. Here I'm assuming it's a female, because of Mrs. Roar. So you need to tell them about the confidentiality, that it's not absolute as far as a counselor is concerned. You will be confidential as long as she doesn't talk about crime, she doesn't talk about harming either herself or someone else. I'm talking about her being a female again. When beginning the meeting with children and adolescents, explanations will need to be made that they can understand. So you need to realize that you're talking to a child here. And you need to use words that they will understand. This isn't easy for some people. They memorize lines. They repeat things specifically. They have eidetic memory, so they sound like a law book. But the reality is that you need to use words that your clients can understand. So you need to determine how well your client understands what you're saying. I worked here I am in Oklahoma again. I was working in a junior high school in Oklahoma, and I had a large number of Hispanic students. Some of them didn't speak English very well, but I had one kid in my class that spoke English fine. He had no problem whatsoever. But he never had to take tests because he claimed that no habla inglés. He couldn't speak English. I know, that's what he claimed, so that he wouldn't have to take any tests. But the reality was, he spoke English as well, just about as well as anybody. Almost as well as I did, but of course he claimed that he couldn't. So you need to determine just how much these individuals can understand. You need to determine how well they understand English. Here on the reservation, if you're talking to somebody who English is their second language, certainly, but they don't speak English very well, then potentially you may have to talk to them in Dene, I'm guessing. Does that make sense? Okay. Just to determine how well they do speak English. And from time to time, of course, if you're talking to Avery or you're talking to Wilson, a lot of times they'll say, well, this is how this is commonly interpreted, but that's not really what it means. They'll say that to you. So sometimes, I mean, as an English speaker, sometimes I understand that the words, that the interpretations aren't very good. Sometimes they're not very good. Okay. And I can accept that. And of course, that's what you're going to have to determine here on the reservation. Special issues of confidentiality will need to be covered. If they're an adolescent or a child, it means they're underage, and if they are underage, each state has their own laws. Do I say that? Each state has their own laws as to what information you can give to their parents or their guardians, whoever their guardians may happen to be. Education about your role is important, as well as what you expect of them. How you will include their parents or caretakers also needs to be made clear. A lot of times, if you have to give the parent or the guardian all the information that the child gives you, then a lot of times they won't tell you anything. Who would? Because they've been trying to hide it from their parents. And if their parents are so detached from their children, then possibly they don't want to know this information anyway. But of course, that's not for you to say. If parents can't get this information out of the child, is it your job to be their inquisitor and then give the parents all this information? Well, in some states it is, and in some states it's not. And of course, that's hard for parents to understand. First meetings with groups and families, be sure that members of the group are acquainted with each other. So you need to introduce them. You don't want any oddballs out sitting in the corner. That will confuse people, and they won't speak as much as they possibly should. You need to clarify ground rules for talking, and usually the ground rules involve one person talks at a time. Some people use things like talking sticks, or they use stuffed animals. Whoever is holding the stuffed animal can talk, but you have to pass it in order for somebody else to talk. This keeps people from interrupting, from talking over select individuals. A lot of times males will talk over females. I do it myself, unfortunately. Despite the fact that I've been trained in this for 25 years, I still will talk over people, and of course that is incorrect. Explain what the role of participants will be in families. You may want to ask how the members want the family to be different. A lot of times, if it's family therapy, of course, obviously there's a problem in the family. Well, how in the world do you want to be better? Do you want to be like some of the television families? Ozzie and Harriet, of course, Ozzie and Harriet. You guys never see Ozzie. I don't know. What's on Modern Family? Is that on television? Is that a cartoon? Modern Family? No, that's the one with the lady with the big chest, right? Yeah. Okay. Oh yeah, okay. Interesting show. It's got a gay couple. It has a May-December couple, right? And they just had a baby. Didn't they have a baby? I never watched the show. I haven't watched the show. I only watch it in 3 months. Then the other family has teenagers, 3 teenagers. Anyway, it's pretty interesting family. Interesting television show. And they're all kind of interrelated somehow. I figured that one out. Okay, so you have to ask them how they want to be different. Confidentiality needs to be discussed and an agreement reached about how information will be shared outside the group or the family. Okay. Now, normally, if you are counseling someone, you are in a group, and sometimes you will take information about your clients to the group, and you will discuss it. So that's one of the first things they do is sign a letter allowing you to share the information with a select group of individuals. For subsequent reasons, some practitioners like to start the session by allowing the client to initiate the conversation, thus setting the direction of the meeting. They may say, where would you like to start? They might say, let's begin by discussing the progress you have made since your last meeting. A lot of times they don't want to talk at all, and of course that is probably the hardest thing about being a counselor, is keeping your mouth shut. Of course, they're looking for advice, and the reality is that the best place for them to get advice is from themselves. What they are doing, potentially what they're doing is talking through their problems and coming up with a way to solve their problems. The reality is that the best solutions come from the clients themselves, not from you. It may be that you won't talk at all, that you won't come up with any advice, and that's probably a good idea. But they cure themselves, and I talk about them curing themselves all the time. That's potentially what should be happening, is the fact that they come up with their own solutions. Confidentiality is one of the most important elements to address at the beginning of the first meeting. You need to assure your clients that information shared with you will be kept confidential, it will be kept secure, and it will not be shared with others unless they sign a consent form. So that's what you're looking for. You need them to sign a consent form for your group, for whatever group you're in. Of course, if you're in a single individual office, then you don't have anybody to share it with. Of course, asking other individuals for advice is not a bad idea. Sometimes you get blinded by what's going on with your client. So sometimes you need to share this with other counselors to get a fresh perspective on what's happening. And for that reason, most organizations have a consent form that all the clients will sign. Or they give them the opportunity to sign it. One of the hardest areas for clients to understand is mandated reporting, and you do have to report select things. If they possibly will hurt themselves or others, then you need to inform the authorities. You need to inform somebody. You don't want anybody to be hurt. We had the mass shooting last night evidently. He killed 50 people. It's possible that he had been seeing a counselor, and it's possible that he talked about this with his counselor. And it's possible that counselor decided that he wouldn't tell anybody because he didn't think he would really do it. That's a possibility. Maybe it's probably. But it's always a possibility. Now, wouldn't you feel guilty if your client just went out and shot 450 people? and killed 50 of them. Wouldn't you feel terrible? I think so. Of course you would. Anyway, so if they talk about doing any harm to themselves or to others, of course, if they commit suicide, you can be sued. Not that the money is important, it's the death that is important, certainly. So that's one of the things that you need to think about as well. Suspected child abuse and neglect, if they are neglecting their children, if they are abusing their children, then this is something you need to tell the authorities as well. Despite the fact that their children are not your clients, if they are mentioning about striking their child, then that is something that you need to tell the authorities. Also, if they talk about elder abuse, how they're not feeding, or what happened in my wife's family is that when their mother came down with pancreatic cancer, her oldest daughter started taking care of her up in Washington State. Well, the husband of the family was a real chintzy fellow, and this is up in Washington, so it's kind of cold up there. But he wouldn't turn the heat. He had the thermostat set on 68 degrees, which was fine for him because his whole family had been living up there for a long time. So 68 degrees was fine as far as they were concerned. Well, she's from Georgia. She's from right around Atlanta. And 68 degrees was, as cold as you can possibly imagine as far as she was concerned. So she kept complaining and they wouldn't do anything about it. So potentially, if one of the family members had gone to a counselor and they had said, well, we keep the temperature at 68 and all grandma does is complain about how cold it is. Well, that's elder abuse. I mean, for one thing, when you're old, your temperature control isn't very good. And for another thing, when you're dying of cancer, you have a hard time regulating your temperature anyway. So they were torturing the old lady. Eventually, of course, we were stationed out in Japan, and in order to take care of the situation, we had to fly back. We had to get reassigned to the States as close to Atlanta as possible. And then we took her in Mississippi. We were stationed in Mississippi. It's only a state away. Mississippi's here, Alabama, and Georgia. It's only like 300 miles. We're like right next door. All we had to do drive to Georgia. Of course, Atlanta is like halfway through Georgia, up on the other side. Anyway, that's as close as they could get us to Georgia. So she came and lived with us, and of course we kept the fire going all the time. We had the heat cranked up to 78 degrees. Felt like a sauna in there. But at least she wasn't miserable. And then she died. She had pancreatic cancer. It's like 95% fatal. So the probability of her, and she didn't want to survive anyway. Anyway, elder abuse, something that you need to tell the police about. Begin your discussion of confidentiality by covering the legal limits of your state. And every state is different. As I keep telling you, every state is different. Montana has no laws about any of these confidentiality things. If you decide that you want to move to Montana where it's cold, it's colder than Washington. Because the wind blows in Montana, it doesn't blow in Washington. If you decide you want to do counseling in Montana, you can counsel as a BSW, a Bachelor of Science Social Work, or an MSW, or a licensed practitioner, a licensed practical social worker, LCSW. You can counsel as a social worker up there. Not here, of course. You have to have a PhD in order to counsel, or some kind of actually you have to have a master's degree in order to counsel. Explain the boundaries of confidentiality to the select individual. Most agencies will have a statement of confidentiality and informed consent that clients must sign during their first appointment. If a client is mandated by the court to see the practitioner is required to report back to the court. Okay, so this is information that you're giving select individuals. If they are a family member, no, you don't have to give them information. However, if they are a parent or a guardian, then in most states, yes, you do have to give them information, especially if the individual is underage. if they are court ordered to see a counselor, then you have to report back to the court. So you have to give them all that information. They can petition they can subpoena your records. And this is something we're going to be talking about. When you're taking down notes about your client, if you, whatever you write down is, they can subpoena. This is one of the reasons why some people don't. They will subpoena the records. A lot of times what a counselor will do, they will take notes, and then they will transfer those notes into an official record. And that's one of the things we're going to do as we're practicing counseling, is making out the official record. Well, they can subpoena the official records. In some states, they can subpoena your notes as well. Not all states, but in some states. New York is one of them where they can subpoena your notes. But of course, it takes a court order in order to do that. They can petition for the records, for the client's records. And that's what's happening right now with Stafford up in Las Vegas. They are petitioning all of his medical records, including his mental health records, trying to determine why this guy blew 50 people away and then shot himself. 68 years old. My age, he's my age. 10 rifles, he had 10 rifles and evidently lots and lots of rounds of ammunition. I wonder if that was his last bullet that he used on himself. I just wonder how many shots he shot, because he hit 450 people. Some of them he might have hit more than once. So, wow, that's a lot of shots to be taking. I don't know. I don't have any other information. I didn't get any good information. I apologize. I should have looked it up. If the client is considered a minor, the parents or guardians usually have the legal right to know what happens in a session. And of course, this is something we just talked about. Each state has their own laws regarding sharing information with parents. Many practitioners will only disclose information if the child's behavior is a threat to self or to others. In other words, you don't have to give them all the information about this kid. And otherwise you won't be able to get the kid to disclose anything. So this is one of the things that you have to be careful of. You don't want to shut the child down just because you have to give select information. So most practitioners will only give negative information, to anything that's a threat to themselves or to others. They don't have to give all the information to the parents. The kid's been smoking pot since he was 5. Well, wait a minute. Do we really want to tell the parents about him smoking pot since he's 5? Do we? Maybe, maybe not. Probably not. You might tell them that he's been using drugs. Possible problems a minor could disclose: being sexually promiscuous, of course, using drugs excessively, threatening to run away, having been abused or neglected, of course. This is something that, this is a real gray area, because the kid tells you that they've been abused, and it's your duty to tell the police that this is the information that you have. I know. So now you're telling, of course, if you tell the parents that the kid's been saying that he's been abused or neglected, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen if you tell the parents that, hey, your kid was telling us that you've been beating him for the last 5 years? If he does anything wrong, you take out a belt and whip him. What's going to happen next? If you tell the parents that?
Well, for one, you're going to lose the trust between yourself and the client.
There you go. So we lose trust. What else was going to happen?
Secondly, even though they may have reported it to you, it still has a lot of gray areas. But then again, to avoid mens rea, you have to probably go forth and report something, because you want to avoid any future case scenarios.
Which is the problem, isn't it? Is this child telling the truth? That's the real question. I mean, the parents could be charged. They could have the child taken away from them. And of course, the kids
It might
just.
not be the parents, it might be one of the other siblings or maybe the
Exactly,
other family members.
exactly. Yeah, this is real hard. And what if the child has been abused or neglected? What's gonna happen next to that child in that family when he goes home?
Make it worse.
But he's gonna get blasted. Yeah, so this is a really tough one.
Yeah.
This is one of those things where you're walking on eggshells. And you really need, before you accuse, in essence, you're accusing them, because if you're giving them this information, it means that you believe it, and if you believe it, then you have to tell the police, you have to tell the authorities, so that they will investigate. And that's probably what will happen. Who would you give this information to? I said the police, but that's incorrect. You would really tell the
Social
police.
service,
I'm sorry?
maybe? Social service?
Yeah, you'd have to give it to Child Protective Services.
It's just
This-
like that incident that happened in Albuquerque where the child,
Right.
the child was given back to mom so many times, so
Right.
they killed her.
Dismembered her and tried to burn her body first, after they sexually abused her. An aunt and a boyfriend. Okay. Yeah, wow, that's a rough one. And and of course, they were talking about whether she slipped through the cracks. And the reality is that they had investigated and investigated and investigated. But the laws of New Mexico forced them to give the child back to the parent. And there was really not a whole lot they could have done, unless they determined that the child was in danger. And of course, there was no way of knowing that until somebody went online and found out that this lady was trying to sell her daughter's virginity, her 10-year-old's virginity. Odd as that is. Okay. Of course, one of the other things that you need to talk about is whether they feel suicidal or homicide, for that matter. So they want to kill somebody. Now, theoretically, you have to tell somebody, you have to tell the police that this person is either going to do harm to themselves or to somebody else. You have to give that information to the police. And they will decide what to do next. But of course, the police aren't counselors, are they? They are. No. Okay, I was worried there for a second. And of course, if your client kills themselves, then whose responsibility is that? That's yours, of course it's yours. If the client kills somebody else, and you had this information, whose responsibility is it? Once again, it's yours,
If you don't report it,
if you don't report it. Yeah, so what you're trying to do, the child is and kids will do this, they'll just throw something at you like this, trying to distract you. Remember, they're doing this while they're doing something else with the other hand. Okay. So using the word homicide or murder or kill or suicide is a way for them to distract you. And it may be a total ruse. And usually it is. 95% of the time it's going to be a total ruse. But you don't have a choice. You have to pursue this. You have to determine if they are really suicidal. You have to determine if they are really homicidal. I know, this is a tough one, isn't it? Groups create additional issues in confidentiality. Confidentiality must be discussed during the first meeting, of course. Most practitioners recommend that group members agree not to discuss information covered in the meeting outside the group or with anyone in the group after the meeting has ended. So we want all group interactions to take place in a fixed situation. We don't want two people going out and talking about, did you hear what Margaret said? Oh my goodness gracious. And then they between the two of them, they start talking about Margaret. You don't want that to happen. You need all of this to take place inside the group setting. So you need to tell them not to do that. So what happens if they do and you find out? What do you do next? You find out that people have been talking about other people in the group between themselves in between sessions. What do you do next? You really don't have a choice. You have to remove them from the group. Many organizations require administrative contracts, which may include the detailed descriptions of the nature and the limits of confidentiality, an explanation of when disclosure is required by law, what to do in cases of emergencies, payment terms, confidentiality of records and email communications, rights of the client to review records, telephone and emergency procedures, cancellation policies, information about the practitioner's qualifications, training, education, and licensure. So one of the first things you're going to talk about is confidentiality. Another thing that you're going to talk about is what you have to give, what you have to disclose to the law. And that would include abuse or suicide or homicide. If any of those words are mentioned, it's like getting on an airplane. The last thing you want to use is the word bomb. If you use the word bomb, they won't let you on the plane. Whether you're joking, it's not a joke. They're serious. They're really serious. So if the word bomb is mentioned, then you get taken off the airplane. So it's the same way with your clients. If they mention homicide or suicide, then you're going to have to respond to that. You don't have a choice. What to do in cases of emergencies. So they've had a drinking problem, and it's Friday night, and Curtis has taken them out to a bar somewhere in Gallup, obviously, where else you can't get alcohol on the reservation. It's against the law. So they need to call you up on the telephone and say, I don't know if I can keep from drinking. I'm just kidding. Curtis taking anybody to the bar. You don't have a car, do you? You have a car? No, of course. So how did you take somebody to Okay. Anyways, okay. So you need to give them an emergency number to call, and probably it won't be your direct line. It'll probably be a service that will contact you, so that you can determine whether you need to give them a call back. This is really important because the reason that you're out there is to get paid. So the payment terms are one of the things that you have to talk about. There are a lot of insurance, a lot of companies do not have any mental health coverage. So payment terms may have to come right out of their pocket. And this is one of the things that you have to talk about. Confidentiality of records and email communications. Of course, their records are confidential unless something happens and they are subpoenaed by a court. The only way that that this information can get to anyone else is if it is subpoenaed by the court. If the police come and ask you for the information, that's not enough. It has to be a subpoena in order for them to get the records. Rights of the client to review their own records. This is another reason why you need to be careful as to what you put in the official records. You have to show them their records, but you don't have to show them your notes, certainly. So if you're going to say something like, what a squirrely individual, you certainly don't want to put that in the records because then they're going to be wondering what squirrely means in psychological terms. What does squirrely actually mean in psychological terms? So you need to be careful as to what you put in the records because they can review their own records. So you don't want to say that I think that this person has been having affairs since they were, for the last 15 years, and of course they haven't, and so they could sue you for putting something in the records that isn't completely accurate. Telephone and emergency procedures, and we just talked about the emergency procedures. Cancellation policies, if they don't cancel within a certain amount of time, usually it's a week. So if an emergency arises and the day before their appointment, they can't cancel, they have to cancel within a select amount of time. And if they don't, they have to pay for the session. This is the way it normally works. Information about the practitioner's qualifications, training and education, and licensure. And of course, you're talking about your expertise and the fact that you have the right to counsel them. Other information that the client needs, they need to understand that they are responsible for the payment, whether the insurance company comes across or not. Right now I'm having trouble with the Navajo Nation, I've got Navajo Nation health insurance. And it confuses everybody because nobody's ever heard of Navajo Nation health insurance. Especially up in Iowa. I didn't even know those people really existed. Oh, okay, fine. Well, let me tell you what, there's like 250,000 of them, and I've got their insurance. So they keep petitioning Navajo Nation Insurance to pay for this or that or the other. And of course, I don't know, it's like the federal government. Sometimes it takes 18 months for Medicaid payments to come through, or Medicare payments to come through. Anyway, payment. So they're responsible for the payment. If the insurance doesn't pay it, they're responsible for that. Emergencies, what entails an emergency. If you're feeling anxious, well, that's not enough. You need to be in crisis in order for an emergency to be considered one. Telephone and email contact, how can you contact me? Of course, I'm really stupid about these things. Evidently, somebody was telling me that you can put your email on your cell phone, so that your cell phone gives you that information whenever somebody emails you. Is that the way it works?
Yeah.
I have 3 mind links on my phone.
I check my email once, maybe twice a day, which is pretty damn good for me, because it used to be once or twice a week.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I'm doing a lot better than I did in the past. Okay, but if I got it on my telephone, I'd get it right away. You know, I'll email Sarah, and she'll just email me right back. I'm going, why? How did you
Now
get
you know
this?
it's
so
on her
quick?
phone.
It's on her phone, yeah, it's on her phone. I don't understand. How the contact between sessions will be handled. Cancellation policies and length of meetings, of course, that's other information that you can give the client. The closing of the session is just as important as the opening minutes. Remember, first impressions are very important, but last impressions are very important as well. Especially if there has been a lot discussed, if it's been a really emotional and traumatic session, a lot of times you're just beat to death. Sometimes after teaching, I'm just so tired, I go down to my office and I have a hard time staying awake. I have to slap myself to keep myself awake because I'm so tired. I put so much into my... Okay, maybe I do. Maybe I'm just an old man, okay? Anyway, I got really, really tired. So, you know, your energy level is declining. So one of the things you need to do is you need to make sure that your closing is as good as your opening is. One of the things that you want to do is you want them to come back. So you need to discuss the possibility of future meetings, what you're going to be doing in the future. We've gone over a lot of really important things. Maybe in the future we can talk about this, this, and this. You're giving them energy, you're giving them something to think about before they come back. What has been covered in the session, of course, and a request for feedback. Because a lot of times they've been talking the entire time and you don't know how they feel about you because they've been talking about themselves. So you need to talk about feedback about the sessions. Are these working for you? Is there something that we need to do? That kind of thing. Ask the client what has been helpful. Support the client's courage. And this is one of the things, this is one of the ways that you can get them to come back. This is one of the techniques that's used in social work, is talking about the strengths of the client. Talking about what they have done right. Too much in psychology is negative. Too much in counseling is negative. I've come in because I have a drug problem. Yes, you have a drug problem, but you're still alive. Most of your friends are dead, but you have been able to sustain yourself despite the fact that you've been shooting up with heroin over the last 15 years. Of course, you can't do that. Usually kill yourself before that. We won't talk about that. But you need to support the client's courage and the client's strength. You need to emphasize the positive things about your client. And that's one of the things that you're looking for in your sessions, is a display of strength or a display of courage. And this is something that you can come back to. One of the hardest things to do is to deal with somebody who is codependent. In other words, somebody that is so wrapped up in another individual that they seem to have lost their own identity. And that's known as codependence. But just the act of them coming in without, of course, that other select individual is an act of courage, and that's something that you can emphasize. Really hard to deal with somebody that's codependent because a lot of times the words that they use are not their words. A lot of times the thoughts are not their thoughts. It's the other person's thoughts, the person that controls them. And of course, if they have come in to talk to a counselor, that's a really positive thing as far as they're concerned. Keep in mind the different cultures have different expectations, of course. We're going to talk about Asians and how Asians expect, well, I already talked about how Asians expect you to, you're the expert, so you fix them. That's their idea. Yeah, they want a quick, and they want as quick a fix as possible. They don't want to mess around talking about their childhood. They want you to fix them right now. By God, you're the doctor, so you fix them. Isn't that the way you do it when you go in to see the doctor, the medical doctor? You know, you go in, you got a cold or your nose is runny, and you want him to give you something right now. You want him to fix you right now. You don't want to have to come in next week. You don't have to come in for the next 3 months. You want something right now. My wife has a back problem, and she's been in pain for, I don't know, about 5 years now. But every time she goes in to see the pain doctor, she wants them to fix her today. She wants it to go away right now. And of course, you know, pain is one of those, pain is really kind of fascinating because pain, it hurts in places that aren't hurt. Pain has the capability of rerouting itself. So you have no idea where the source is. Unless you can take the source away, then the pain won't go away. That's the way pain works. So you have to take away the source of the pain. So a lot of times what will happen is, so you've got a problem right here in your butt, and it's hurting in your lower back. Why is it hurting in your lower back? Well, it's rerouted itself around something that was blocking it, and now the pain's in your lower back. But the pain actually starts in your gluteus maximus. It doesn't have anything to do with your lower back, but your lower back is hurting. In order to fix that pain, you need to go back to the source. And so they have to trace it back to the source, and this takes time. And it's hard, it's very difficult for the doctor to determine where that pain comes from. And then the other thing is, you want the pain to go away, so he gives you a medication that makes the pain go away. This is a good thing, except now we've masked the pain. We have no idea where the source is. So we can't fix it. All we can do is regulate your pain. Does all that make sense? Okay. Okay, so let's talk about psychic pain. We got the same problem here. Yeah, sure, we can make the pain go away. I can throw Prozac at you and make you not depressed anymore. I can give you Xanax and now you're not anxious anymore. What is that really going to fix you?
It only fixes symptoms.
I'm sorry?
It only fixes symptoms.
Yeah, all you're doing is treating the symptoms. You're not treating the source. So you have to go back to the source. Just like if the pain's in your butt, you gotta trace it all the way back. And it's going to take time. That's the way that stuff works. So that makes sense? I know, that made so much sense. I'm shocked. I should write a text. How would you like to, closing statements that you might potentially use, how would you like to end today? We have 10 minutes left today, so what would you like to talk about? This seems like a good place to stop today. We talked about some important things today. Although we need to end for now, it seems like it might be helpful to continue our discussion next time. And of course, you're trying to bring them back. Not because you need the money, but because remember, we have to find the source of their problem. So we need them to keep coming back. It's not like I've got a cold, you're going to give me cold capsules, and now I'll never see you again. I do this to my doctor all the time. I went in over the summer. What did I have? I had high blood pressure. I think I had high blood pressure. No, I had high cholesterol. And I started taking my statins again. So once I started taking my statins, I figured I didn't need to go and see the doctor. And so he called me up, he said, you need to come back in for another appointment. I said, no, I don't. And I didn't go in to see him again. So, you know, I'm as bad as anybody as far as going back to see the doctor. Okay. But we have to find the source, don't we? I've got high cholesterol, obviously I've got high cholesterol. I figured I had it fixed. Maybe I didn't, maybe I'm clogging up as we speak. And as I'm walking down the stairs, my heart's gonna get all clogged up with you know, grease. I'm gonna have a heart attack and poor Edison's gonna have to give me mouth to mouth. I'm gonna be dead anyway, my heart's gonna stop beating. Edison, just let me go. Don't worry about it. Just call the meat wagon and have them drag me out of here. Tie a rope around my leg and pull me down the stairs.
You stay away from churches, that's no problem.
Leave your car keys for us.
I never go to churches. My wife went to churches for a sandwich, and she got sick. She was sick for like 3 days. I know.
Which one?
The
Ours?
one in Chinle.
They didn't change the grease again.
It's possible. Anyway, so I worry about grease, obviously, my job. We have 15 minutes left. Do you have any closing thoughts about our meeting today? Let's talk about what we have accomplished today. All of these are things that you can say at the end of a session. What did you find most helpful in our work today? I would recommend that we meet weekly for the next 4 weeks and then evaluate our progress. Does that plan sound okay to you? We're about out of time and have covered most of the points on our agenda. I think this is a good point to end. Shall we meet again next week at the same time, same place, same bat station, of course. I know, it's an old television show nobody's ever seen but me. So I'm making a joke that nobody understands but me. Okay, fine. I know.
6 or 7?
That was 7, I think. Let me find 8. 8's got about. Okay, we got about 10 minutes. So if you haven't done your character, you need to do it because we're gonna start this fairly quickly. This is midterm week, right? Or is it? It is. I've got some people saying yes and some people saying no. Next week?
Okay, I thought it was next week. Okay, next week, sorry.
Okay, it's next week.
Yeah.
So we'll probably start after next week. Or next week we'll start. Counseling, each other. I will, there's a wonderful article in a magazine. Oh, that's my car. It's my mother's car. It's what I inherited from my mother. I got a comb. And a bottle of pills. Baby aspirin. I know. Okay. Anyway, baby aspirin. So what was I talking about? And a brush. I got a brush from him. Okay. Oh, we're going to start counseling next week. Yeah, I found a really good article about online counseling. It's the new thing. People are doing a lot of counseling online. So since we have all those guys up in Tuba City, it's about half and half. About half the class is in the classroom and half the class is in Tuba City. I'll work something out. We'll figure something out. Maybe somebody has a better idea than I do about how to do this online counseling with the Tuba City people. I don't know. I'm not very astute as far as this stuff is concerned. You were saying maybe using ITV, but that room
Is that available?
is hardly ever available. So that's going to be a tough one. And they also have to go in to see. They also have to go to their ITV. It has to be available in Tuba City as well.
Well, I have another question, but
Sure.
it's not about class. I know that there's online counselors like on the internet.
Right.
Where do you find that type of information? Because with my child, as you know her, yeah, I need mobility and fluidity in order to work after I get out of here. I don't want to be tied down to one location all the time.
Okay. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure. You're also talking about different states, aren't you? Because you go up to Utah from time to time.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So you're talking about different states as well as, as different locations. I'm not exactly sure. Well, right here on the New Mexico border, as it turns out, if you drive to Gallup, you go in and out of New Mexico like, 150 times or something, I don't know. And you never know if you're in New Mexico or Arizona. So, you're dealing with Utah, you're dealing with Arizona, and you're dealing with New Mexico. And everybody has their own rules and laws and whatnot. So, I don't know. Online sounds like it might be a good way to take care of the situation.
Because now that you mentioned states, say I set up a counseling group, whatever,
Sure.
in Arizona. If I'm mobile and on the internet, I can be sitting over here somewhere in the, on top of a mountain, relaxing, watching the sunset, and doing my counseling in Arizona,
Right,
or
Right.
whatever state.
depending. Yeah, and I am not sure what the laws and rules are for Arizona, for New Mexico, and for Utah. I'm not exactly sure how any of this stuff works as far as Medicaid and Medicare, and not TRICARE. Well, in any of the insurances, some states are different, and especially if if this administration changes any of the rules. What they're talking about is giving the states piles of money and letting the states decide how they're going to distribute it. Medicare, Medicaid money, not Medicare money, Medicaid money. So, all the insurances are really up in the air. There is no final or midterm in this class. You've been taking quizzes all along, so your midterm grade, which is next week, I guess I really don't have to talk about it today, but your midterm grade will have to do with how much work you've done. If you turn in your character thing, that's 50 points, and that's a lot. So you may think about that if you're not doing very well on the quizzes. Quizzes aren't that hard. I don't think they are. People seem to do okay last.
Did you resend the paper and such?
Did I?
For the quiz?
I did. I did.
And for the character?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, I got one back today. You can email that back to me. Joe filled this out, but you can email this back to me.
So that, when you have, that goes with the character, right?
Yeah, this goes with the character. It's only, 4 pages long? Yeah, it's only 4 pages long, which isn't too bad. The other one was a lot more pages. But this is only 4 pages long, which isn't too bad. You need to write your paper. Your paper has to be on whatever your character's problem is. So if it's depression, you need to write a paper on depression. If it's marital problems, you have to write about marital problems.
Multiple diagnosis would be how many pages?
Multiple diagnosis is still the 4 pages.
Okay.
It's still the 4 pages.
And this character can be anybody, right?
It's you.
How about me?
It's your alter ego.
Oh.
It's a problem that you don't actually have. So that's one of the things. I don't want you to counsel yourself or for somebody to try to fix you if you've really got a problem. That's unethical, and we're not going to do that. That's why you have to come up with a bogus problem that you don't have.
Yeah,
And
I
it's
did.
not close to you.
I did one on an individual that I know.
That's fine, as long as, how close are you to this individual?
Not that one.
That's fine. Sure. It'll be easier for you. If you can focus on somebody and say, this is how they would act in this situation, this is what they would say. Yeah, it's a little bit easier, as long as you're not close to them. It's not, if it's not one of your kids, not one of your parents, if it's not, your brother or sister. It's probably okay. Somebody that you're not very close to, that's all right. I mean, obviously, I talk about people all the time. Obviously, I'm not very close to these people. I talk about my brother and my sister-in-law. And my niece, I'm not very close to her.
My children, we're not close to them.
I think you are close to your children.